Your daughter walks across the stage in her cap and gown. Your chest tightens, your eyes sting, and then, without warning, tears are running down your face on what should be the happiest day of your life. You laugh at yourself, a little embarrassed. Why are you crying? Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, but the real answer is far stranger than tears of joy. Your body is not confused. Your brain is not malfunctioning. Something ancient and precise is happening inside you, and it has almost nothing to do with sadness at all. Start with the obvious question. What actually is a tear? Not the salty drop on your cheek, but the biological event underneath it. Tears fall into 3 categories, and only one of them is emotional. Basal tears keep your eyes lubricated every second of the day, whether you notice them or not. Reflex tears flood out when a speck of dust hits your cornea, or when you slice an onion and release a chemical called sin, propanethyl S, oxide into the air. But the third kind, psychic tears, are different. They are triggered not by your eyeball, but by your limbic system. That is the emotional core of your brain, and it does not distinguish nearly as cleanly between joy and grief as you might assume. Neuroscientist and biological anthropologist Vingerhoets has spent decades studying why humans cry, and one of his central findings is almost unsettling in its simplicity. Crying is not really a response to sadness. It is a response to overwhelm. Any emotion, stretched past a certain intensity, can trigger the same physical mechanism. Grief can do it. Fear can do it, and so, it turns out, can joy so large your nervous system does not know where else to put it. Vingerhoets and his colleagues surveyed thousands of people across dozens of countries, asking a simple question. What made you cry most recently? The answers clustered less around specific emotions and more around specific structures. Farewells, reunions, moments of profound helplessness or profound triumph. Loss of control in either direction kept appearing. It did not seem to matter whether the loss of control tipped toward devastation or toward relief. What mattered was the size of the event relative to the person's ability to process it in real time. A small disappointment rarely produces tears. A crushing grief almost always does. And so, apparently, does a joy too enormous to metabolize quietly. Think about what is actually happening in your body at your daughter's graduation. Your heart rate has picked up. Cortisol and adrenaline are circulating. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, has registered that something significant is unfolding, something meaningful enough to require your full attention. In evolutionary terms, your body is treating this moment the same way it would treat danger. Not because joy is dangerous, because your nervous system's oldest response to intensity is arousal first, categorization second. Here is where it gets stranger. Psychologist Oriana Aragon at Yale conducted a series of studies asking a deceptively simple question. Why do people squeeze puppies, pinch babies' cheeks, or say, "I just want to eat you up," when they see something impossibly cute? She called it Dimorphous expression, the tendency for one emotion to produce 2 opposite-looking physical reactions. Overwhelming positive feeling does not just produce smiles. It can produce tears, gritted teeth, even mock aggression. Her research found that people who cried at happy events were often better at emotional regulation, not worse. The tears were not a breakdown. They were a release valve. Consider what a release valve is actually for. A pressure cooker does not fail when steam escapes through its valve. It succeeds. The valve exists precisely because pressure has to go somewhere, or the entire system breaks. Your emotional nervous system may work the same way. When positive arousal builds faster than your conscious mind can process it, crying becomes the fastest available exit for that charge. Not because something is wrong, because something is too big to hold silently. Aragon's team went further, tracking participants as they watched videos of adorable animals and reunions between family members separated for years. The people whose faces showed the strongest mixed expressions, tears alongside laughter, gritted teeth alongside grins, were consistently the same people who recovered fastest from a subsequent stressful task. Their bodies seemed to be using the mixed expression as a kind of built-in shock absorber. The tears were not a symptom of being overwhelmed. They were the mechanism that prevented the overwhelm from lingering. In other words, crying at happy things may not just accompany emotional regulation. It may actively perform it. This idea connects to something even older than modern psychology. Your ancestors did not cry at graduations. They did not have graduations. But they almost certainly cried at moments of profound relief, moments when danger passed, when a lost child was found, when a hunt that meant survival succeeded against the odds. Evolutionary biologists have proposed that tears may have served as an honest signal. Unlike a smile, which can be faked in half a second, Tears are difficult to produce on command. They cost the body real physiological resources. And in a small tribal group, where trust was survival, an involuntary signal that could not easily be faked carried enormous social weight. Think about what that means. A tear was proof. Proof that what you were feeling was real, whether that feeling was grief or overwhelming relief. Anyone could say the words, "I am so happy." Far fewer people could summon tears without actually feeling something enormous. Your ancestors' social groups likely responded to that signal instinctively, drawing closer to someone who was visibly, provably moved. Crying did not push people away. It pulled them in. This is sometimes called the vulnerability signal hypothesis. Tears blur your vision. They mark your face in a way that is hard to hide. In a dangerous world, choosing, even unconsciously, to display that kind of vulnerability was not a small thing. It meant lowering your guard in front of others. Evolutionary psychologists have argued that this is precisely why tears are so effective at deepening bonds. A signal that costs you something to produce, and that leaves you momentarily exposed, is a signal that other minds are wired to trust. Your ancestors did not need language to know that a crying face, whether twisted in grief or lit up with relief, deserved their attention and often their help. There is a hormonal layer to this as well. When you experience an intensely positive, socially connecting moment, your body releases oxytocin, sometimes called a bonding hormone. Researchers have found that oxytocin plays a role in triggering tears during moments of emotional connection, not just moments of loss. Combine that with a spike in prolactin, a hormone also linked to the tear response, and you get a chemical cocktail that is remarkably similar whether you are watching a war reunion video or standing at a funeral. Your brain lights up the same core circuitry. The context is what tells you afterward whether to call it happiness or grief. This overlap explains something many people notice but rarely question: why happy tears and sad tears feel, physically, almost identical as they happen. The tightness in the throat, the stinging behind the eyes, the involuntary catch in your breathing. If you were blindfolded and only given access to the physical sensations, without any of the surrounding context, you would likely struggle to tell the two apart. That is not a flaw in your perception. It is an accurate reflection of what is actually happening beneath the surface. The machinery genuinely is the same machinery. Only the story wrapped around it changes. There is a developmental clue buried in this too. Human infants are born capable of crying almost immediately, long before they are capable of most other communication. That first cry at birth is not emotional in the way an adult's tears are, but it establishes something crucial. Crying is your species' original, pre-verbal signal system. Before you could form a single word, your body already knew how to broadcast an internal state loud enough for someone else to respond to it. Everything that follows, including the strange experience of crying at a wedding decades later, is arguably a more sophisticated version of that same original circuitry. You never fully graduate from it. You just learn, slowly, to attach more complicated meanings to the same base mechanism. This is worth sitting with for a moment. You do not decide to cry and then figure out why. Your body responds first, fast and wordless, and your conscious mind assembles the explanation second. Psychologists call this appraisal, the process by which you interpret a physical state after it has already begun. Your heart is already pounding, your eyes are already welling, and only afterward does your prefrontal cortex step in to say, "This is joy, not sorrow." The feeling comes first, the label comes later. So why does this particular mismatch, tears during happiness, feel so surprising to people? Because modern culture has spent centuries training you to treat crying as a single purpose signal. Crying means sad. Crying means hurt. Crying means something is wrong and needs fixing. That association is cultural, not biological. Anthropologists studying grief and celebration across different societies have found wide variation in how openly people cry, and in what contexts it is considered appropriate. In many cultures, weeping at weddings, at reunions, at moments of collective triumph, is not just accepted, it is expected. It is a mark of how deeply you understand the moment's significance. Consider the Olympic athlete who wins gold after a lifetime of training and immediately collapses into tears on the podium. No one watching assumes she is devastated. Everyone understands instantly that this is what triumph looks like when it finally lands in a body that has waited years for it. The tears are not confusion. They are translation. They are the nervous system's way of saying, "This moment is too large for words, so here is something else instead." Compare that to a culture where public emotional restraint is prized, where crying in front of colleagues or strangers is considered a lapse in composure, rather than an honest signal. In those settings, people do not stop having the same internal spike of overwhelming feeling. They simply suppress the outward sign of it, often at a measurable physiological cost. Researchers studying cross-cultural emotional display rules have found that the urge to cry appears to be remarkably consistent worldwide, even when the permission to act on that urge varies enormously. What differs is not the wiring. What differs is whether the environment around you treats the signal as acceptable or as something to be swallowed. There is also a release element that researchers have connected to relief specifically distinct from joy. Relief tears often follow a period of sustained tension. A parent waiting for a biopsy result, a student waiting for exam scores, a soldier's family waiting by the phone. When the news is finally good, the tears that follow are not simply about happiness in isolation. They are about the sudden collapse of a threat response that had been active, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. Your body had been bracing. When it no longer needs to brace, the release itself produces a physical event, and that event often looks exactly like grief from the outside, even though internally it is closer to collapse from relief. Think about what sustained bracing actually costs a body. Elevated cortisol for days. A nervous system locked in a low hum of vigilance, scanning for the worst possible outcome. This is expensive metabolically and psychologically. It cannot be maintained indefinitely without consequence. So when the threat resolves, when the phone call finally brings good news, the body does not simply switch off calmly like a light. It discharges often all at once, and tears are frequently the fastest visible channel for that discharge. This is why relief crying can feel almost more intense, more physical, than ordinary happy crying. It is not one emotion being expressed. It is days or weeks of suppressed threat response finally finding an exit alongside the joy of the resolution itself. This is why the phrase, tears of joy, undersells what is actually happening. It suggests joy is simply an alternate flavor of the same emotion that produces sad tears. But researchers like Vingerhoets argue the mechanism is less about the specific emotion and more about intensity crossing a threshold combined with a social context that makes crying feel safe. You are far more likely to cry at your own wedding than during a private moment of quiet happiness alone in your apartment, even if the private moment is, in some abstract sense, equally pleasant. Why? Because crying at its evolutionary core may be as much a social signal as an emotional release. It works best and appears most often when there are witnesses. Think about the last time you cried during a movie. Chances are it was not during the saddest scene. It was during the reunion, the unexpected act of kindness, the moment a character who fought for years finally succeeds. Screenwriters and directors have understood this instinctively for a century, even without the neuroscience to explain it. Catharsis does not require sadness. It requires accumulated tension released all at once, in a direction that finally resolves. Notice the structure of almost every scene built to make an audience cry happy tears. It rarely arrives without warning. It is preceded by struggle, by doubt, by a long stretch where the outcome felt uncertain. The tears do not appear at the setup. They appear at the payoff, in the exact instant the tension breaks. This is not an accident of storytelling craft. It mirrors the biological pattern almost exactly. Build sustained arousal, then resolve it suddenly in a positive direction, and the body responds with the same release mechanism it would use for any other form of accumulated pressure, finally finding its exit. There is a reason this matters beyond curiosity. Understanding that tears are a signal of intensity, not sadness, can change how you interpret your own reactions and the reactions of people around you. A friend who cries when you tell them good news is not secretly upset. A colleague who tears up during a heartfelt speech at a retirement party is not embarrassed by weakness. They are experiencing a nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, translating something too large for language into something the body can express and other people can recognize. This also reframes what it means to hold back tears. Suppressing an overwhelming positive emotion does not make you more composed. It simply means your body is absorbing pressure it was built to release. Some researchers studying emotional suppression have found that people who consistently block tears, whether from sadness or joy, report higher levels of physical tension and lower satisfaction after emotionally significant events. The valve exists for a reason. Closing it does not eliminate the pressure. It just relocates it. There is a physical cost to constant suppression that goes beyond the emotional. Chronic emotional inhibition has been linked in multiple studies to elevated baseline heart rate and higher markers of stress even outside of any specific triggering event. The The body, it seems, keeps a kind of running tally. Every unreleased spike of overwhelming feeling does not simply vanish once the moment passes. It appears to accumulate, contributing to a general baseline of tension that shows up later, often in contexts that have nothing to do with the original event. This is one reason people who have just experienced something enormous, whether joyful or devastating, often describe feeling strangely lighter after finally crying. The tears were never really about sadness. They were about discharge. There is one more piece worth understanding before returning to that stage, and that cap and gown. Not everyone cries at the same threshold, and that variation is not a flaw either. Personality research has found that traits like empathy and openness to experience correlate with a lower threshold for emotional tears, happy or sad. This does not mean people who rarely cry feel less. It often means their particular nervous systems require a larger spike or a different kind of trigger before the valve opens. Crying easily is not a sign of fragility, and crying rarely is not a sign of coldness. Both are simply different calibrations of the same ancient system, tuned slightly differently by genetics, upbringing, and the countless small experiences that shape how any one person's body learns to handle overwhelming states. So consider your daughter again, walking across that stage. Your body is not confused. It has correctly identified an event of enormous significance, one that closes a chapter years in the making, one loaded with pride, memory, relief, and love all at once. Your limbic system does not have a separate folder for each of those. It has one response for overwhelming significance, and tears are how that response finds its way to the surface. The chemistry is ancient. The trigger in this case happens to be joy. Your ancestors cried at survival. You cry at graduations, weddings, reunions at airports, the moment a song finally lands exactly where it needed to. The context has changed almost beyond recognition. The wiring underneath it has not changed at all. It is worth noticing how many of your own strongest crying moments as an adult cluster around exactly the same theme: arrival. The end of a long effort. The safe return of someone you love. The completion of something you were not certain you would finish. These are, at their core, modern echoes of the same ancient scenario your nervous system was built for: sustained danger or uncertainty followed by resolution. You do not live surrounded by predators anymore, but your body has not been told that the underlying pattern, tension followed by release, no longer matters. It still responds to that pattern with the same ancient tool every time it recognizes the shape of the moment. So the next time tears catch you off guard in a moment that should only feel like happiness, you do not need an explanation, and you certainly do not need an apology. Your body has simply done what it was built to do since long before language existed. It has taken something too enormous for words and given it somewhere to go. Your daughter crosses the stage, your chest tightens, your eyes sting, and this time you understand exactly why.